Every year, 10,000 or so video games are released. But not every game can be good. Some are good, some stink, and some become the worst video game of the year. But if you dig deep in this hole, you find that there is a thing called the worst game of each decade. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to look into the worst games of each decade, talk about them, play them, and see if people are stupid or if the games justify the title they've got. 80s. We're going to start with the 80s because that's the decade when video games became popular for the very first time. And for the 80s, choosing the worst video game is not even a difficult thing, because we literally have the worst video game of all time, as many people call it, which is E.T. the Extraterrestrial. E.T. was a movie created by Steven Spielberg, who might be one of the greatest Hollywood director of all time. He created the movie. The movie made millions, but they wanted to make this movie into a video game, so they hired a studio and gave them 5 weeks to create a video game. Now, let me tell you that creating a video game in 5 weeks is impossible, even back then. But the studio had the deadline. They somehow worked hundreds of hours a week and finished the game. But the final product was so bad that it literally caused a video game crash in the United States of America. Everyone stopped playing video games all of a sudden. Yeah, that's the effect one video game had, and you thought Cyberpunk was bad. Well, it's good now, after the new update. Anyway, back to the topic. I mean, asking to make a different game in 5 weeks is like asking Nintendo to stop suing the fans. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. So, the game was bad, and the reason is, well, there are a lot of reasons. First of all, you can literally beat this game in 1 minute. All you need to do is collect 3 collectibles in the game, make a phone call, and you are out of the game. So there's nothing to do in the game. If you are thinking that this game is 40 years old, then remember, this game was developed at the same time Mario was being developed. And besides that, everything was bad in this game. It was choppy, the movement was messed up, there were no graphics, nothing. And this game, again, was so bad, Atari literally buried the copies underground to hide their shame. But you can go ahead and play it. You know the method. Now for the most important bit, which is avenaut opinion, meaning my opinion. So I believe this game was trash. It deserved all the bullshit thrown at it. But I have to, and also you too should accept the fact that it was impossible to make a good game in that time period. 5 weeks is nothing. Whenever I see people talk about, this is the worst game ever, they talk like they're Atari, and they developed and made this game by their own choice. They wanted the game to look like this while completely avoiding the deadline. And the deadline was there because they wanted the game to release around its movie. But anyway, everything happened for the better. If this game did not release, we probably would never have the Super Mario Bros. Boom in the gaming industry in America, and a lot of things probably never happened. Maybe PlayStation was never created, and if PlayStation was never created, maybe Xbox was never created. Okay, now I'm over-exaggerating, but you get my point. This game is important. This game is history. Alright, now let's move on to the next decade. The decade of the 1990s was the era of 3D video games, but now let's talk about the worst video game of the 1990s. And I have the perfect pick for you. I have 2 picks, and you know which one I'm talking about. You have seen this. I'm talking about Philips' CD, The Legend of Zelda, and Mario. Don't remember? Here's the cutscene.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy.
I just wonder what Ganon's up to.
Only Link can defeat Ganon.
Great, I'll grab my...
I know that kicked in memory, so what's the story behind it? Well, let me explain. The story behind it is that in the 1990s, Philips wanted to make a half console, half study. You can say machine, computer, whatever. The goal was to make something that could educate children and let them play games too. And somehow, I don't know how, they convinced greedy Nintendo to let them make some games for this console. And they ended up making Mario and Zelda games. And they even hired a studio to draw some cutscenes for them, because they wanted to be involved in the 3D era. But the final product was laughable. When you imagine Link, what do you imagine? A mute boy fighting monsters in green cloth. But the cutscene shows him as some goofy teenager. The story is completely bullshit, and the gameplay is below average. And that's why these games are called the worst of the 1990s. And I believe that the platformers deserve it. There can be some more mediocre games out there, but these 2 games have a legacy of their own. Because can you Can you even imagine yourself Nintendo accepting that these are Mario and Zelda games? They will never accept that. Their fans will never accept that, but they are. And I can't think of any other Mario game that is so bad. But when I played these two games, and you probably will play them too, you won't feel totally disgusted like people did in the 90s, because these games now feel like history. And no matter how bad that is, you're going to kind of have an excitement to play them, like, hey, this is the thing that's called the worst video game of all time. But people at that time didn't know that this would become what it would become. They bought the game, but they did not get the enjoyment, so they were mad. But history is history. And what impact has this game had on the industry? Well, it did not crash the video game market like Atari, because PlayStation was already dominating. But it did crush hopes of Philips entering the console market. After that, they never tried to make something like that, and they stuck to making lights. I think good for them. We don't need another army in the console war. It's already getting pretty bad with Spider-Man versus Starfield. Who even came up with this matchups? The 2000s, the Simpsons video game? The Simpsons wrestling game. There are a lot of Simpsons games, from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s. They want to do everything. So they released this wrestling game. Who thinks of wrestling with the Simpsons? But this game was terrible. Why? Well, what do you play a wrestling game for? Some smooth gameplay, some fighting moves, some action. It had none of them. They were trying to sell it under the Simpsons name. The gameplay is choppy as hell, and within 5 minutes you will be bored. I played this game, and now there isn't much history or nostalgia factor. The game just felt lame and bad. If you want to do something out of the box, do it in the correct way. Now for the impact part, in my opinion, well, even though this game can be called the worst game of 2000, arguably, it still did not have any major impact. Simpsons still make millions to this day every single year. But the video game scope is very limited because, let's be honest, TV show games are not really the thing anymore. No one wants to play a game about Family Guy anymore. No one wants to play a game about Rick and Morty. Why would they? The TV show is good enough. And no one would want to take on such a project and get harassed by fans when the game turns out bad. So yeah, that was the impact of the Simpsons wrestling game. Now for the next decade, and oh boy, get ready. For 2010, the game is Ride to Hell, Retribution. And the best part, the literal best part, about the game is that Studio marketed this as a GTA-type game. Basically, a GTA killer. And I swear, the history has taught us many lessons, that whenever a game tried to be a GTA killer, it ended up killing its own franchisee. And this game, well, was a hot mess. And remember, this game was released in 2013, the same year as GTA 5. But I can't even say that this was 1% of the game. When you market a game as like a badass game set in 1960, ride by, kill people, you need to actually make people enjoy this game. And when people played this game, they questioned everything in their life choices that led them to play this game. Oop. The plot, the game does not have it. And the controls are like they were created for Famicom controllers. At least you should have nailed the controller part. And overall, the characters, NPCs, story, mechanics, etc. just do not fit in. They had no idea what they were trying to do, and after the release of this game, everyone lost their head and started talking to the studio about making the whole garbage. And just like that, this game became a contender for the worst video game of all time. And that's why I'm placing it as the 2010 worst game. In my opinion, and the influence of this game, I just want to say, don't market your game as a GTA killer. I'm not saying that you can't make a better game than GTA. Well, you can. But trying to cash in on the big name and compete against a billion-dollar company like Rockstar Games, you're probably not going to win it. Now for the 2020s, and remember, this decade is not even half done, but we need to find something. We need to come up with something, and I'm going with Cyberpunk. Just kidding, I don't think this game is the worst game of the decade. Yeah, this game might be the most hyped game of the decade, but not the worst. When people expect something so big, they are meant to be disappointed. I get it. CD Projekt made Witcher 3, Witcher 2, and Witcher 1, and fans thought, man, what better they could do after Witcher 3? And they were disappointed. But let's just not talk about that today. Let's talk about the worst game of this decade so far, and there are many, many options. But I'm going with, to freshen up your memory, the Golem game. Yeah, remember the studio went bankrupt. The most important thing is that this game does not feel like it's from this generation. The graphics, the quality of the game, and the mechanics. You can't expect that people will buy this game for PlayStation 5. Why would they? It has nothing of that. It felt like some indie developer was trying to create some game for the first time, and that's the result. And I get it. This game was bashed by people back and forth from 360 degrees, and it kind of deserves it. And this game might be a perfect example of why you should never pre-book a video game. Not always. Like, you can trust your favorite studio like Rockstar Games. You know what I'm talking about, but pre-booking sometimes can backfire. Forspoken and this game are the perfect examples. So these were the worst games of each decade, from the 1980s to the current decade. And I believe you might at least know one of these games, if not all. And this was my idea to take you on this video game history. So what do you think about the video? Let me know in the comments section and also in the next video. Till then, take care and say goodbye.